It's 12:01, so I think we've got all of our speakers signed in here. So for those of you that just joined, I'm Dr. Bain Wilson, assistant professor in Virginia Tech, Department of Animal and Poultry Sciences, and also work as an extension specialist. For those of you that I haven't met or haven't seen anything kind of come out from me there yet. But I'm gonna fill in for Dr. Griner. He's been kind of leading these the last 2 weeks. I've talked on these the last 2 weeks, but I'll save you from that this week. I think we've got some pretty good speakers. Before we get started, just some housekeeping. If you all could just click there and mute your mic, just so we don't have too much feedback. And I guess our first speaker is going to be Willie Morris from VDACS. Willie, I'll stop sharing screen if you want to go ahead and kind of share screen and kind of let us know, so let us see what you have. All right, I thought we had Willie on. I don't guess we have Mike Carpenter either. We'll see if they can join us here in just a minute here. Alex White is kind of our other speaker. Alex, can you go ahead and pop on here then, and then we can hopefully get our update from VDACS here later on.
Hi, Bain. I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
I cannot share my screen with you at the moment. It says it's disabled.
All right. Can you do that now?
There we go. And hopefully you're seeing the title page or title slide to my presentation. Is that correct?
Yep, we got you.
All right then. Well, I'll kick you off here this morning. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope you haven't washed down the river with all the rain we've been getting. But they asked me to talk to you today about some key financial considerations to make for the upcoming season or the upcoming couple of years. So I'm going to give it my best shot. And here we go. All right, first thing, want everybody to know there's a recent IRS ruling just came out about capital purchases. They said that for livestock producers, it is okay to buy a boat and write it off. They got some video evidence of how farmers are using their these boats to check the cows, check their pastures, move their sheep, and so on. So if you want to buy a boat, hey, go ahead and take a shot at writing it off. But just a disclaimer, nope, fake news. But we've had a ton of rain down here, so we're not going to be getting in the hayfields or in the pastures here very soon. But just talk about what's going on out there. You folks know as well as I do that there's been a disruption in the supply chain. Again, on the processing side, the difference between retail and institutional processing, this has lowered the demand for live cattle, which has lowered your farm level prices. And I guess Willie and I just forgot the other fellow's name. We're going to talk about that here in a bit. But so we got lower farm level prices. The supply of meat in the grocery stores is relatively low, so we're seeing some higher retail prices. So what we need to think about long-term in the industry is what's going to be the impact on consumer demand of higher higher retail prices. And another thing, what's going to be the reaction of those meat substitutes out there? Are they going to try and take any actions to increase their market share while this disruption is going on? All right, hold on. My button just stuck there on me. All right, so if we're in the processing standpoint, if you look at the livestock industry as sort of a HACCP plan, that box right there in the middle, the marketing and processing, is the one that's holding things up and really disrupting the markets. For most producers, they don't have a whole lot of control over that right now. So we need to be able to manage around that. So just sort of keep that in thought in mind as we go. And what's my crystal ball? You know what? I'm personally am looking for large structural changes in the U.S. meat processing supply chain. I think we're going to see a move away from the concentration in processing. I think we'll maybe see some local breaking stations. And the thought process here is, hey, let's have centralized kill stations, but then have local breaking stations so that the meat supply can be better tailored to the demand out there. And I also think that a lot of grocery stores and the retailers might move away from the just-in-time inventory systems. Both of these are going to lead to a decreased efficiency in the marketplace, which is probably going to lead to higher consumer level prices. And again, we need to think what's going to be the impact on overall demand. What else is going on out there? The USDA market outlook from Monday says that they are expecting lower imports over the next year. This should provide us with some upward pressure on prices, but they also come out almost the next sentence and say they're expecting record beef production in 2021 and increased lamb and sheep production in 2021 as well. Both of those are going to act to put downward pressure on the farm level prices. So when we look at all this, I'm not seeing a whole lot of upward pressure on farm level prices for the next 6 months to 2 years. And this is going to lead to potential cash flow and liquidity issues for a lot of producers out there. So we need to think, how are you going to prepare to meet this situation? Lots of different options out there. Can you change your herd size? Should you change your production as far as feeding the hotter ration or a lower energy ration out there? Should we look at new enterprises or a different marketing plan? But the answer is you need to have a plan and you need to stick to your fundamentals. Okay. So when you folks are already used to making decisions in uncertain times, so, we don't know what's going to happen with prices. We don't know what's going to happen with weather. International trade's always up in the air. So you're used to making decisions in this, this juggling environment. But what you need to do is go back and revisit your goals and your core values. Try and figure out what are the main reason you're in business. Okay. This is critical to making good decisions that are going to move you towards where you want to go. And just as a couple of examples, if your if your main goal is to maximize profit versus minimizing losses, well, that's going to lead you to make different changes. Okay. It's going to lead you to make different choices. If another situation here, if you're looking at minimizing your taxes versus maximizing what's left over after taxes, you're still going to make significantly different decisions out there. So go back, revisit your goals, revisit your core values, figure out what's important to you, and then develop a plan, and then develop 1 or 2 backup plans as well. In case plan A doesn't work, now you've got plan B and plan C ready to go. So keep the fundamentals of, again, sticking to your fundamentals. Think about that thought process, and let's sum it up with the concept of if it costs more than it's worth, don't do it. This is just a partial budget format. So if you're thinking of making any decisions with your operation, just break it into what's the good side of the change and what's the bad side of the change. The good side is just going to be what added revenues are you expecting, or what reduced expenses are you going to have with the change you're anticipating. The bad side, are we having less money coming in the form of revenues, or are we having more money going out in the form of added expenses? And very simply, if the good side is greater than the bad side, when we total this up, if your assumptions hold true, your profits should increase. Okay. So sort of keep that fundamental thought process in the back of your brain as we go here today. And as an example, let's say you're currently selling 550 pound weaned calves, but you're thinking of holding to 750. What's going to be the changes here? You can see my assumptions. I've assumed a 2 pound per day average daily gain. I've used futures prices and throw a little bit of slide in there for the heavier calves. I estimated the pasture cost or the feed cost in the form of a hay equivalent, and threw in some extra costs. And again, 1% death loss, 2% shrink. When we look at this in the partial budget standpoint, that heavier calf, the 750 pound calf, has a lower price per hundredweight, but it's going to get us about $136 more in revenue than the 550 pound calf. But it's going to take us about $108 to get that calf up to that weight. So $93 in feed, $15 in interest, in possible grain, labor, extra vet bills, and so on. So in this case, when we total things up, the good side comes up to $873. The bad side comes up to $845. So if we make this change, according to my assumptions, we should see a net change in profits of $28 per head. So notice we didn't include any other factors that don't change. With a partial budget, you only consider things that are going to change with your decision. A nice part about setting up your thought process this way, it tells us, yes, we're going to see a change in profits, but it also gives us sensitivity analysis. We can go through and figure out what's your break-even selling price. So I assumed, I think $120, $122 per hundredweight in my assumptions. But this says as long as our selling price is greater than $116 per hundredweight, we will be just as good off as we were when we were selling the 550-pound calves. So that gives you a little bit of sensitivity analysis on your decision. Another thing we can do is figure out what's the maximum cost of gain. In this case, it's 68 cents a pound, 68 cents per pound of gain. So as long as we can raise these calves up to the 750 pounds without going over 68 cents per pound of gain, again, according to our assumptions, we should be okay. Now then, let's get into some financial tips here. My first main tip for you here is develop an improved financial record keeping system. Most producers hate the financial aspects of their operation, but you need to have a good financial record keeping system. And two pieces of advice here. Let's set it up so you have enterprise accounting. This breaks up your expenses by enterprise rather than just lumping them all together. An example, when you have a fertilizer expense, say you have $50,000 of fertilizer expense for the year. Well, let's break that up into how much went onto your pastures versus how much went onto your hayfields versus how much went onto your cornfields or wherever else. You need to have enterprise accounting so that you can calculate your cost of production. Okay, so let's put the cost of production on a per hundredweight or per acre or per cow basis. This is a crucial number that every farmer, every business manager needs to understand. Next piece of advice is work with your accountant and set up an accrual base or accrual adjusted record keeping system. And all this really requires is having beginning of year and ending of year balance sheets so we can account for inventory changes. What this does, this helps us break out any tax moves that you're making or buildup of inventories because of expansion or so on. But if you're going to have your cost of production, let's use the accrual-based enterprise accounting system to get the good costs out there. The bad cop in this case is if we just use that darn Schedule F. The Schedule F is not a good decision-making tool. When you look at the accrual-based statements are much more accurate. And when we look at this over time, there's a 55 to 70% difference between your cash net income and your accrual-based net income. So let's try and base all your decisions on accrual basis or accrual adjusted records. If you're using something like a QuickBooks or a Quicken, it's very simple to do, but we just need to make sure we have that beginning of year and end of year balance sheet. For your cost of production, again, we can do the short run. What do we need to cover our costs this year? Or we can geek this up a little bit and say, well, how much do we need to generate for our revenues to cover our total expenses, which includes any interest that's foregone or any owner labor that hasn't been paid. Again, just set this up so that matches your situation. If you can't cover this long run cost of production on average, this means you're living off depreciation, which says you can't you can't replace your equipment or your facilities as they wear out. Or you're going to be constantly answering that question, honey, why can't we go on vacation this year? Well, we didn't generate enough cash to cover our cost of production, so we can't increase our family living expense. So by having these costs of production, it's going to allow you to do a bunch of break-evens. We can calculate your break-even selling price. That's going to be very useful for your marketing decisions. We can calculate the maximum input prices we can afford to pay. So this helps us from a ration balancing standpoint. We can look at decisions such as, should we buy our feeds or should we produce them ourselves? Which one is more cost effective? And it can help us with our marketing decisions. Should we put more gain on the calves? Should we add new enterprises? Should we do custom heifer raising, those types of things? Again, the cost of gain, Dr. Kearns talked about that, and I think Dr. Griner's talked about it. You just need to understand the cost of gain. We're going to compare that to the added value of that gain, not the price per hundredweight. So in this example, you have a 600-pound calf at $140 hundredweight, generating a value of $840. 700-pound calf at $130 per hundredweight is generating $70 more in value. So that extra 100 pounds is just worth that $70. So we're looking at the cost, compare the cost of gain to the value of that gain, not the price per hundredweight. Okay, a couple more financial tips for you here real quick. Number one, develop a monthly cash flow statement or a cash budget. This shows the cash inflows and the cash outflows for your operation. And you should also include your household expenses and inflows in here. If you have non-farm revenue, we want to see what our cash situation is going to be for the upcoming year. If we identify periods of cash surplus, now we can figure out when we have cash to pay down our debts a little bit earlier, or build our savings, build our liquidity, or make a down payment on a capital purchase that we might need. It also helps us figure out what is our estimated operating line needs for the upcoming year, and it helps us show the lender when we'll be able to repay that line. It's going to help us schedule any term debt payments you're going to be making on new debt you might be incurring, and it's going to really impress your creditors. If you walk into your lender with a cash flow statement, they're really going to turn cartwheels. They're going to be really excited. Next thing, maintain open conversation with your lender. The worst thing you can do is go and hide in the sand. If you think you're going to have trouble making your payments, let them know your situation as early as you can. Just have that open conversation. That gives them a lot more options to work with you. So next tip there, maintain that open communication. Next financial tip is have a tax management plan. Taxes, most of the tax moves that we make, we're just kicking the can down the road. If you think about it, you need to spend about $3 to $4 to save $1 in taxes. And in my opinion, what if you just paid the $1 in taxes, but you saved the other $2 or $3 you would have spent or written a check to somebody else? But let's use that money to build your liquidity, build your savings account so you can get through a couple of bad months or, half a year or something like that. Or can we use it to pay down our debt, free up some of the operating line as we go? So just think about your tax management plan out there. It's crucial from a from a cash management standpoint. As an example here, let's assume last year you paid $50,000 for your feed and fertilizer. You paid that in December. Put that on your 2019 tax records. If we're in the 30% tax bracket, that saved you $15,000 in taxes. Okay, but look at this: you spent $50,000 to save $15,000. That's a net outflow of $35,000. Okay, think if this is a bad year. Okay, prices are going to be low. You're not going to have the cash available because of the low price, or you don't have the line of credit available. You've already expensed out that $50,000 of feed. So your taxable income in this year, which might be a much worse year, is going to be basically $50,000 higher than it should be. So have an exit plan if you're going to prepay your expenses. Next thing, again, let's get out of the habit of just buying stuff at the end of the year if you don't need it. If it's something that's going to improve your profitability and your efficiency, it makes sense. But if you're just going to go out and buy something and that piece of equipment's just going to sit around, this is not a wise, profitable decision, in my opinion. It's going to hurt your liquidity. It's going to dig into your cash availability. It's going to hurt your profitability because we have an unused or an underused asset on the farm, and it's going to hurt your financial efficiency. If we go ahead and borrow money to make this purchase, now then this is going to hurt us from a liquidity, solvency, repayment ability, profitability, and financial efficiency standpoint. And those are the things that your lenders evaluate you on for your financial condition. So again, if it's something that's going to help you improve your operation, make you more profitable, it makes sense. But if you're just buying something for the sake of buying it because we don't want to give money to the government, you're basically, in this example, throwing $20,000 to $30,000 out the window. So have a plan there, make sure it makes sense. And then to finish up, like we try and drill into all my students and all the extension programs, build your emergency savings. Let's try and build up your usable liquidity to 3 to 6 months worth of normal business expenses. From a lender standpoint, they look at your working capital, which is your current assets minus your current liabilities, and they divide that by your total expenses. They'd like to see that ratio greater than 25%. That means that you'd have roughly 3 months or a quarter of the years of your business expenses on hand and should be able to make those payments relatively easily. Okay, so build your emergency savings to 3 to 6 months of normal expenses. Have a clear, defined marketing plan. Okay, price protection is going to be critical over the next couple of years. So think how you're going to sell your animals, how you're going to protect your price. Is it through contracting, futures, options, whatever? And stick to your fundamentals. Let's remember, you don't go out of business taking profits. So a small profit here and there can add up over time. And then finally, just have a risk management plan. Think about backup markets for your livestock. Think about backup suppliers in case you lose a supplier, you have a constant supply there. Think about liability insurance. Think about estate and transition planning should something happen. These things you should be doing all the time, but they're going to be much more important here over the next couple of years. So with that in mind, I'm done. Bane, you want to open up for questions or you want to do this at the end? I'm flexible.
Thank you, Dr. White. And so I think let's just type any questions you have. If you can put them in the chat bar or the chat box, just so we can kind of maybe address them maybe between speakers or at the end. I think that'll keep things probably most orderly. For those of you that don't know Alex White, he's in high demand. Every time I see him in Lytton Reeves, he's tired from teaching or doing so many extension programs. Our next speaker, who we're going to start out with, but just had some technical issues there, is Willie Morris from VDACS, and he's going to give us a livestock market update. Definitely probably need to put one of these in every webinar for the foreseeable future as things keep changing so much. So, Willie, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Bane. Apologize for the issues before there. Not being able to figure out how to get my phone off mute in a normal fashion. That was my fault. I apologize. So last week in our feeder sales that were state graded, that we took reports on, things were pretty steady on the steer side. We saw in our total of 800 weight steers, we saw a change of a -1 cent. 5 weights are pretty much level. 6 weights were actually gained a little bit of steam and had some extra value to them in just a little over 1.5 cents. The little interesting thing about last week was our heifers were a lot stronger. We saw the 4 to 5 weight heifers be almost 4 cents stronger. Our 5 to 6 weight heifers be almost 3 cents stronger, and our 6 to 7 weight heifers be about 2.25 cents stronger, which could be for a lot of reasons. Probably mostly would have to do with quality and on average than anything else. But in terms of the overall market report, I would consider it very steady. The overall sales last week in Virginia were right against 4,000. It was 3,952. The week before, I believe it was 3,916 or something. So, I mean, very, very similar numbers in terms of what we saw the week before, and just kind of a steady market. We've seen the grass market pretty much get their satisfaction and their fill. So we're going to see, some ebbs and flows in the market, and it's going to have a lot more to do with quantity rather than quantity. Last week, our 5 to 6 weights topped out at 163, and the lows were in the 115 range, and that's for medium and large number ones. And again, that's going to have to do with quality in terms of obviously they're medium and large number ones, but color would have a lot to do with the variance there. In terms of our fat cattle markets, obviously, I guess the Chicago Board of Trade today is right there in their June traded cattle somewhere around 98 cents. Our feeder cattle somewhere in that 118 range when I looked it up, about a half hour ago. The interesting thing that I still see with the market that we're in right now is last week we had two different fed cattle, live cattle rather, sales in Virginia where the choice and prime cattle, both steers and heifers, were anywhere from 113 to 122. We're seeing the live trade surpass what we're seeing for the contracted trade cattle. Not quite sure what that all means yet, but it certainly is encouraging for the people that are here within our state that are still feeding some cattle. We do have a facility in Lynchburg, Seven Hills, that has been slaughtering some cattle and using us in VDACS to grade the carcasses. And it's been kind of slow up until about a month ago. And we've gotten the news a couple of days ago that they're actually going to a 5-day-a-week kill. And we're going to be grading there 2 days a week at least. So there is some optimism on a local market in terms of our slaughter cattle, which I think would be encouraging all the way down through our feeder cattle, especially considering some of the uncertainties in some of the larger facilities and the larger packing entities that are kind of got this thing controlled right now. So that would be some encouraging news, as well as anybody that just kind of gets out and listens. And we fielded a tremendous amount of phone calls within VDACS about people looking for places to get, whether they be hogs, lambs, or steers butchered. They're definitely looking for places to do that. So some of our more local feeding facilities, more local packing plants are seeing the effects of what's going on with COVID. Cautiously optimistic on that, on my personal opinion, to see what happens if there is a balance created again. There's still a lot of people in this industry that have been conditioned to look to the Chicago Board of Trade to what the value of these animals are. So we'll see how that all plays out in the next, I would say, 6 months to 2 years. But right now there is some optimism, and there are some places within the market that local people, if they have the ability, can still capture some additional premium for the product that they've got. That's my report for this week. If anybody has any questions, I'm not on Zoom. We're not allowed to do that on our state, our phones. So I'm not on Zoom. I'm just on speaker. So if anybody's got any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
I guess any questions for Willie while he's on here? All right. If you think of something, go ahead and you can type it in there. And if Willie's still on, we'll kind of work to get those asked kind of over the phone then. So
yeah, I'll stay.
Great. All right. So I think we'll move on to our next speaker here, and that'll be Dr. Gabe Pent. He's been with Virginia Cooperative Extension for the last several years, but most recently, the last year, is now the new superintendent of the Shenandoah Valley AREC. And he's going to talk to us about summer pasture forage management. So we'll turn it over to Dr. Pent.
All right, thanks, Bane. You can see my screen okay? Hear me fine?
Yeah, we got you.
All right, sounds good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This picture is a wish list for me. I wish this time of year we could be in the hayfields, but like the rest of you, we've been pretty wet lately. So this is a picture from last year. It makes me remember back fondly to when there was a dry breeze blowing and the sun was shining. This figure see, from Roy Blazer, who was a Virginia Tech forage agronomist some years back. I'm sure we've seen it, or many of you have seen it before, or something like it. The message of this slide is often how do we optimize the balance between hay production yield and the nutritive value, or in this case, digestibility of the hay that we produce. As you can see in the figure, as the grass or the legume grows, yield, of course, goes up, but at the same time, you're having a almost linear decline in the digestibility of that forage, and to some extent the intake as well of what the animals would consume of that forage. So what Dr. Blazer and many forage agronomists have recommended is that the balance is somewhere around, for beef cattle producers, cutting around the early heading phase or late boot stage of the forage. And this is to strike a balance between yield and the nutritive value of forage. And unfortunately for us, and probably for the rest of you, we're at about late bloom here at the research farm, or sorry, not late bloom, late boot, and probably in the middle of, or getting close to heading. And really no end in sight for the weather to clear up for us, at least not enough to make dry hay. And so it's certainly been a challenge, and I think this is something that we strive for, but is often unrealistic in this weather that we're dealing with. So what do we do in those situations? Well, I really do think that baleage is a great option. It provides a lot of flexibility for beef cattle producers, allows you to get hay up on time if you have a very short window. Sometimes you might only need a day to produce baleage, a day of drying time. And so this technology can allow us to put a very high quality hay if we have the ability to do it, and if we also have the ability to feed it in an efficient and cost-effective way once it's been ensilled later for the feeding season. Apart from that, what are the options? Well, I would say that there are very limited options, of course, at this point with the way the weather's looking, at least for us. And so I'm just keeping an eye on the weather, and as soon as we get some dry weather, we'll start working on the hay. But getting equipment ready beforehand so that you can be out there and hopefully not run into any problems as soon as you're out on the fields, it would be a wise strategy. I would also say many forage agronomists agree that concern over rain on hay often delays hay cutting and has more of an impact on forage digestibility than actually some rain on the hay. Of course, an earlier rain on hay is better than a late rain on hay, and a lighter rain is better in terms of less reduction in quality than a very heavy rain. So if you're looking at the forecast, keep those principles in mind. Wanted to talk a little bit about what we do when we have to cut stands like orchard grass or other cool season grasses later in the summer because of inclement weather in the spring and early summer months. And so came up with a few slides from Dr. Gordon Jones, who was a graduate student at Virginia Tech under Dr. Ben Tracy a few years back when I was also a student. He did a lot of work on orchard grass and trying to answer the question of why are our orchard grass stands dying out? Why do we see thinning of orchard grass stands? And so he came up with a diagram like this, supported his hypothesis to show how the relationship between cutting height and increased date or later date of cutting had an impact, negative impact on long-term persistence of the stand of grass. So for example, as you can see, the lower that the cutting height goes, of course, you reduce your stubble height and thereby reduces the level of shading, but also carbohydrate storage. As we know with cool season grasses like orchard grass, they store energy in the stem, and so the more energy or more stem that you take when you harvest, the less you have available for regrowth, which in turn reduces the amount of biomass and thereby, again, the shading on the soil, which has a negative feedback loop associated with it on carbohydrate production and regrowth. So the message here is, as we create new machines and that can more and more efficiently harvest forage, be cognizant of the fact that you can mow too low, and that this has a negative effect not just on long-term biomass production, but also the long-term persistence of that stand of grass. So for orchard grass and tall fescue, we want to shoot for around a 3 to 4 inch residual height, and I would probably err on the higher side as we get into the later months, and certainly the drier months as well. Here at the AREC, we mow generally around 4 inches, I would say, is the average. And of course, given different levels in the field, it would be anywhere from about 3.5 inches to 4.5 inch residual on the orchard grass. Now, a lot of people want to cut low because you get more bales out of the field. And Gordon showed this in one study where he changed the cutting height of the stand of grass, as you can see along the x-axis, from 5 centimeters to 20 centimeters. And you can see that the lower you cut, as it would make sense, the more bales or the more tonnage you would get out of that stand of grass. But that's probably a short-sighted approach. Gordon also did a study where he had some orchard grass grown in pots, and he cut some to a 3-inch residual, and then he cut some to a 1-inch residual. You can see the pictures of those plants there. They were regrown in growth chambers, either at 20 degrees centigrade or 35 degrees centigrade, respectively. And then he evaluated the regrowth on those shoots 11 days after defoliation. You can see how much more dramatic the regrowth is when the plant is cut at an appropriate height, in this case, 3 inches. And you can imagine what kind of effect this has on the soil temperatures, especially in late months. There was less of an effect, however, in this case on shoot regrowth at the 35 degree centigrade level. But the ultimate question, of course, was how does cutting height impact the persistence of that stand and that stand thinning out? And so in a field trial, he cut these grasses at from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 centimeters in height, and measured the productivity and also persistence of those stand over 3 years, from top to bottom, 2014, 15, and 2016 at the bottom. So you can see at the lower level the relative visual comparison of the percent of orchard grass versus weeds versus bare ground in those stands, and at about, well, across both the first and the third cuttings, there was significantly less orchard grass only after 3 years of this type of management in the low cutting height stand. So another tip that I want to stress is make sure that your cutting heights are at a good level, especially as we get later into the summer. Also thinking ahead about the summer slump. I know this is hard to imagine, but this time could very well come in just a few months where we are short on rain and we don't have any, very little growth, very little forage in our pasture systems. And so thinking ahead, how do we prepare for those instances? One of the strategies that we've employed here at the Shenandoah Valley Agricultural Research and Extension Center, this was developed by David Fisk, the previous superintendent here. It's called summer stockpiling. I know many of you have probably heard of fall stockpiling, which is allowing forage, particularly tall fescue, to accumulate in the fall months and then grazing it in the wintertime. Summer stockpiling, on the other hand, is deferring grazing on pastures from the spring green up all the way through the fall, so utilizing it in the fall. And the real value in this is that this gives you forage that you can utilize. In our case, we strip graze it at about the same time when we're trying to defer grazing on our fall stockpile pastures. And so this is a way to give you a little bit of flexibility in having extra feed as you're trying to prepare for the winter time. one of the things we've noticed about this summer stockpile tall fescue, many times it looks pretty rank. It looks very mature, but oftentimes there's some secondary tillers in there that have a lot of green, nutritious growth in them. And so Matt Boer, John Benner, and David had a publication where they noticed from their sampling here at the AREC that the tall fescue was around 60% TDN and 11.3% crude protein, and they realized almost 3.5 tons of forage availability per acre from this summer stockpile. So the quality can be good, certainly good enough for spring calving cows that may have just weaned a calf, and pretty good in often cases if can meet the needs of fall calving cows as well. We actually calve in some cases on this summer stockpile. Taylor Langford was Dr. Wilson's graduate student, just defended his thesis, and he reported levels of TDN greater than 62% and crude protein greater than about 10%. And then his range in forage availability ranged from about 5,300 to 7,100 pounds per acre. So you can produce a lot of dry matter with this approach, and it's pretty good stuff, even though it can look somewhat disconcerting, at least from the road anyway. Summer annuals are also a way to give you some flexibility and some additional forage real quickly if you need them. However, they're risky. Oftentimes, trying to establish grasses in the summertime can be fraught with difficulty and bad weather. And it's expensive. So there's a lot of inputs that are required, not just labor, but also the cost of the seed, fertilizer, and spraying. And so a lot of times it's hard to imagine this makes any financial sense in a long-term situation. In my estimation, I think annuals make sense when seed is discounted. What I mean by this is something like a cover crop scenario, or if you have a way to put down cover crops and you receive a payment for that, and it's within the guidelines that you can utilize that cover crop for forage to some extent, then that's a very good option to have some additional forage. Annuals are also useful in the pasture renovation process. We'll talk about this in a bit, but when you're converting pastures to a different type of forage, or you're just trying to renovate a stand and get rid of some weeds, utilizing it in some sort of annual crop or annual forage crop can be helpful to rejuvenate the stand. And then also, if high quality feed is needed, generally I think of this in terms beyond just beef cows, perhaps finishers that are being finished on grass, or maybe even stocker calves, but annuals can provide very high quality feed for classes that have high demands like that, or else emergency feed. And so be, I guess, cognizant of the fact that annuals can produce forage with proper weather and establishment techniques in as little as 45 to 60 days in some cases. Now is also a good time to evaluate your hayfields and pastures. I know many of your pastures won't look like this, even if they are in bad condition right now. And so it can be pretty deceiving if you look at a pasture now, what kind of shape it's in. So try to remember back to last summer, any notes you may have made. Now's a good time to start thinking about renovation and remembering which fields need to be, something needs to be done on based on your notes from last year. So for example, at the AREC here, we've got a hayfield that last year we cut, pretty timely manner, pretty fine residual height, but it essentially didn't regrow. There's a lot of weeds in it afterward, hemp dogbane, milkweed. And so I marked that field for renovation last year. You look at it now and it looks excellent. A lot of, there's orchard grass, tall fescue, bluegrass, but I know those summer annual weeds are there. And so I know that that's a field that I want to cut hay on and then put on a summer annual before eventually converting it to alfalfa this fall. For those of you that are interested in renovation, a couple strategies that I'm familiar with and have utilized are presented here. These are slides from the Alliance for Grassland Renewal, which is dedicated to the idea of converting Kentucky 31 tall fescue pastures to novel endophyte tall fescue. This strategy called the spray summer smother spray is the technique that we're going to use on this hayfield here at the AREC. We're going to cut the hay, remove the hay from the stand this spring and summer. We're going to cut pretty low and then allow it to regrow. After about a week or two, we'll spray that stand and kill it, and then we'll immediately establish a foxtail millet or German millet, which will be what we call our smother crop there in the summertime. We'll harvest that smother crop in about 45 to 60 days after it's been planted, and then we will remove it as a hay crop and immediately terminate, or within a week or two, terminate it and any residual weeds that have germinated over the summer with some Roundup. Immediately after that, we'll plant our new field. In the case of this diagram, it would be novel indified tall fescue. In our case, we're going to utilize alfalfa. Another technique that doesn't involve a smother crop, this is the spray weight spray approach. And so you could theoretically cut your hay, or you could clip the pastures. The important thing is here that you don't want your tall fescue to be producing seed heads if the goal is to switch to novel endophyte technology in the fall. And so you want to make sure you manage those seed heads, whether it's through hay, seed head suppression, clipping, or even grazing. If you can do that, that may be difficult. Your first spray would take place about 4 to 6 weeks prior to when you'd want to plant. This would kill the old stand, and then you would wait a few weeks, 4 to 6 weeks again, to spray a second time, and this would kill any weeds, escape tillers, or volunteer seedlings that had come up since the first spray. And then you would plant your new forage immediately right after that. So even though this strategy is shorter, it does involve some preparation now, seed head management now, and so this is one reason why I wanted to bring it up today. Finally, wanted to conclude with some thoughts on clipping pastures. I know a lot of people feel strongly one way or the other about it. We don't do a lot of clipping here at the AREC. I wrote an article in the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council's newsletter last year about this. Essentially, I've done some searching around in the literature, and I can't find any evidence, even though you hear about it all the time, that tall seed heads can impact or increase pink eye in cattle. Now, it may make some logical sense. We may debate that, but to date, I have not seen any research study that shows that occurs or not. As far as bush hogging or clipping to control weeds, well, if you talk to any weed specialist, they'll tell you that it takes many, many mowings to control weeds. And so at $15, $10 an acre to bush hog, I'd say that's some pretty intense and expensive weed control methods when you can spray for about as much and be done with it, instead of trying to mow several times a year times several years. Clipping can improve nutritive value of a forage, but I don't think this is useful for anything related to beef cows, perhaps for stockers or for finishers or for some other classes of livestock. They may be able to take advantage of that increase in quality. Of course, a lot of people, whether they admit it or not, like to clip just for aesthetics, and I understand this for sure. So if that's something that's important to people, then that's probably a good thing to keep in mind, particularly if you're leasing land. So those are the thoughts I had. Bane, any questions? I haven't been monitoring the chat box. But...
Yes, we've got a couple.
Let me see if I can figure out how to pull it up.
Okay. Now I can just ask them to you.
Yeah, go ahead and ask them. I don't know why I can't find my Zoom.
Okay. All right, so got one question, or kind of a multi-part question. It says, besides cutting height, how important is soil fertility management in orchard grass persistence?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Gordon looked at that too, as far as soil fertility goes, and it was, of course, all over the board across the state, as I remember correctly. And that certainly would have a compounding effect on cutting height, persistence, and growth. So certainly don't discount it. be cognizant of when you apply those nutrients. I would be wary of applying nitrogen fertilizer too late, as it may have some, late in the summer, as it may have some negative impacts or positive impacts on weed growth and thereby negative impacts on the orchard grass itself. But yes, that's an excellent point. Be cognizant of keeping your fertility up to recommended levels.
Okay. So kind of a follow-up to that is what is a reasonable period of time for an orchard grass stand before replanting?
Ooh. Oh, I don't know. I think we need to take a survey on that question. I would say that you try to be getting greater than 5 years of productivity out of it. And I don't know if that's unreasonable or not in some situations, but to have die out and bare ground occurring in 3 years, 4 years, and maybe even 5 years, I think is indicates that there's some underlying problem in that stand.
Okay. Yeah, so that one's probably kind of your typical extension answer. It depends on a lot of things, but you'll say 5 years if everything's going well.
At least, you're right.
Okay. I think currently that's all the forage related questions I've got. I've got a couple I think that I guess we'll probably shoot over to Willie Morse, kind of more related to markets.
Yes.
So Willie,
Okay.
I'll just read these off to you. So first question is, would a ban or restricted imports of beef have a significant impact on pricing for domestic producers?
I'm sorry, repeat that again. You were breaking up a bit.
Okay. Would a ban or restricted imports of beef have a significant impact on pricing for domestic producers?
Short term, I would say probably not, because of the issues that we're dealing with now. It sounds good and it looks good on paper, but short term, I would say probably not. Long term, I think that I like that phrase, let's take a poll, because we're probably going to find out that within the meat industry, it always sounds good from the out or from the inside, saying that we produce so much product. Why are we importing? We import in large portion the stuff that we don't pride ourselves in making, the very lower cuts, the lower product that in large part we as producers within the United States don't pride ourselves within making. So, on a global aspect, if we're going to look at this globally in imports and exports, there are very few places, if any, in the world besides Canada that can produce the quality that we produce. So there is a need for that low end product that we don't necessarily have enough of all the time. So, not to get up on my soapbox about it, but it seems to me like short term, it because of the backlog that we have in our products, unless we can get our packing facilities up and running in full order, it's not going to make a significant difference other than the immediate impact of a little spike in the market. We've got so much product right now backlogged, both on foot and waiting to be in the feed yards. It's going to be a difficult road for us to hoe. So we'll see. But I would hope that it would, but I'm a little bit pessimistic of that.
Okay, Willie. So a little bit of just kind of a second part to that question. You kind of touched on it in your answer to the first part. Are there more pros or cons with kind of possible changes in meat imports?
Yeah, if we're looking at, and again, I did touch on it a little bit. I think that I think the American producer needs to realize just how premium a product that we create, and then also how much of a demand that there is for the low quality product. So in a sense, it would make more sense for us to be able to export our premium product and import the low quality product that would go to your McDonald's, whatevers of the world that sell that product, in terms of putting the most money in the farmer's pocket. So I guess that's the way I look at it. Yes, there's some definite pros to shutting down the borders to import of meat until we get our supply cleaned. But the cons of that are going to be some of our more premium products may be worth less, even though some of our lesser quality product may be worth more. I think it's going to be a wash. And then when there is the need to do some global trade, we may not have as much bargaining power as we did before because of basically shutting it off for a while. So it's going to be harder to get it restarted. And that last part was a personal belief of mine, but I do know that what we create is a premium product in the global market. So we need to continue to try to market our premium product as hard as we can. And if that means we have to import some lesser quality product to keep that up, it's still more total dollars for the American farmer.
All right. Thank you for that, Willie. I've got a couple other questions kind of for you. Maybe a little more straightforward than that. Kind of the next question is, do you have any suggestions for accessing a market price for fat cattle that are being sold direct to consumers through local slaughter plants?
Yes, that's a very easy question to answer. If you go to the market report on a monthly basis, and last week Stanton Union Stockyard had their monthly slaughter cattle sale, and Front Royal Livestock Market, which I think trades under Virginia Livestock, both had their graded sales. So my recommendation for anybody selling or buying private would be to access the monthly graded report. And as I stated earlier, I believe that the choice cattle were anywhere between 110 and 123, I believe. Without having those numbers right in front of me now, I think that's kind of where they were, and it's going to differentiate between heifers and steers. But I would definitely go there, and if you were selling, use that to base your market pricing on the live basis. If you wanted to go with the carcass pricing and how to buy or sell on carcass pricing, a safe number to use is 60% in terms of overall yield. So if you've got a 1,200 pound carcass, 60% of that, and then do the math to see what it's worth on a carcass basis.
All right, thank you. I got one more for you.
But I would definitely. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, if you want to, got something else to follow up with that one.
Oh no, I was going to say I would definitely. I mean, it's easy to see what fat cattle sales that we have in the state. They're posted on Virginia, on VDACS's website as well as the USDA's market reports, and they're identified. So, I mean, they're easy to find, and if anybody's got any question about finding them, they can contact me and I can walk them through it. But that's the easiest way to know to determine a fair market price.
All right, I've got another one about fat cattle. Comment just kind of joined in here. So last 2 weeks ago, we made some comments about holding on to cattle to kind of see where the market kind of shapes out, because we had that massive spike in box beef prices, and we're kind of in the midst
Correct.
of plant shutdowns. So
Correct.
They're saying, based on where we are today, is that kind of the same opinion?
Are we talking about? Are you talking about holding on to slaughter cattle or feeder cattle?
Feeder cattle.
Feeder cattle. All right.
Feeder cattle. Okay. So on the feeder cattle side of things, if we look at kind of what they've been doing, once you get those cattle, once you get them over 800 pounds, I mean, okay, for instance, last week, medium and large number ones. Now, these are commingled sales, and these are not, these are not obviously preconditioned one owner cattle, but just on the grid that comes out for us from Market News, the 7 to 8 weight medium and large number ones bring anywhere from $1.15 to $1.35. You go to 6 to 7 weights, and they go from $1.22 to $1.46. So if you look at the high end of that, I mean, you're already looking at a 12-cent drop. Last week at Rockingham Livestock, we saw one load of field cattle, one owner group, bring $1.37.5. You get back into the 8 weights, and they go down to $1.21. So my gut instinct on where this market is and the volatility of it is that the guys that are feeding them want to have more options with them in terms of how they feed them. So if you hang on to them, if you're going to hang on to them and you got 5 weights, I say roll on, hang on to them, graze them, coast them slow, do what you got to. If you start getting to that 800-pound mark, there's when you can see a lot more spikes and a lot more lows in the market, because it depends on who's going to need them the particular day you're selling, especially if you're selling them in a live market, as to what you may get. Now, you may get along just fine, or you may see a significant discount in your product. So I guess the long and short of my ramble is anything from 5 to 7 weight, I would say still hang on to them and manage them. When you start getting to that 8 to that 9 weight mark, you better be looking at marking opportunities and avenues, because what we see is when those guys want that size cattle or that particular flesh cattle, whether yours are thin or medium or even heavy fleshed, when they want them hard, and the rest of them are kind of speculated on. But the guys that are putting in continuous loads of cattle back to back, and running continuous loads of cattle through, they want to buy them at a small enough or a light enough weight where if this market looks like it might spike in 3 months, they can push them hard, or if it looks like it's going to back off, they can back off the feed. They want the options, and they're not going to necessarily give them to you. And there's a lot more of those guys out there than there are the ones that when they want to load of 9 weights, they're going to buy them no matter what.
And slaughter weight?
And
cattle for slaughter. What are those
Yes.
dynamics and recommendations?
If they are, to be honest with you, what we have seen on the limited number of slaughter cattle that get graded and sold in the state of Virginia, they've been above what you see on the Chicago board, and they've also, for the most part, been very competitive with the high end of the New Holland trade. So if they're high quality, young enough choice slaughter cattle that look like they're going to yield, I mean, they're going to be above what we see on the national average. They have been for a couple of months now, for whatever reason, and I haven't had anybody be able to give me a good reason for that. But they have been, and my guess is it's mostly because of we've got a strong enough local trade. We've still got Truth in Maryland that's killing. You've got a couple of the kosher kills in that Northeast. We've got competition now strong with Seven Hills, who seems to be gaining some steam. We've obviously got some of the smaller local plants in Virginia that are killing more. So One thing about a slaughter ready animal, once they're slaughter ready, you can only hold them but so long. But I would have more optimism with a 1,300-pound choice steer right now than I would with a 900-pound calf ready to go to the feed yard.
All right. I think the last question for you, Willie, is do you have any comments on the sheep or goat market conditions?
There was, and I should have said that, Matthew, in our weekly report, Matthew Spinagle did the grading and the evaluation, and also helped with the sale of the Madison lamb and goat. And they had, hold on, I'll pull those numbers up real quick. I apologize. They had 120 lambs and goats. We're on the tail end of Ramadan, which means we're in a strong holiday demand. And the choice and prime lambs that were over 85 pounds, he quoted them at $1.89 to $2 a pound. That'll last one more week, and then we'll see those prices start to go down. I don't think we're gonna see them get extremely low, but we will see those prices go down, and then it'll gradually pick back up for Eid in the fall. But if you've got, my request for anybody that would have choice or prime lambs, which are smooth lambs, 85 to 105 to 10 pounds, is sell them in the next week.
All right. Thank you, Willie. I think in general, we've got one more comment from Taylor Clark, extension agent there, kind of a follow-up to the orchard grass questions we had. He kind of typed that into the comments for everyone, but I'll just kind of, for those of you on the phone, he says that Dr. Dale Wolf did some work showing improved persistence and in following kind of late or early winter fertilization. So that'd be kind of similar to turf or lawn management recommendations. So for those asking about orchard grass persistence, to kind of add on to what Dr. Pent said, that might be something else to kind of think about. All right, and I think that's all of our questions. I really appreciate everybody's attention this afternoon. We will work on getting this posted kind of the same as we have been doing for the last couple of weeks. And so our next two sessions would be June 12th and June 26th, same time on Friday at noon. So I appreciate everybody joining, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and a great Memorial Day weekend.